It's been a big topic of conversation here on my channel about putting ourselves in the jurors' shoes, because so many people were claiming that Alex didn't get a fair trial because the jury was influenced by comments allegedly made by Becky Hill. This has always infuriated me, and I've said it so many times here on my channel that it's insulting to them for us to think that they're so incapable that they could be so easily swayed and couldn't come up with a fair verdict on their own. Would you like to hear what some of them had to say? Fox News interviewed 2 of them, and this is what they had to say. If you have the Fox News app, I highly recommend going and watching this interview for yourself, and if you don't, never fear, I have all the important details from it to present to you today. Let's get started. This is Legal Updates with Cassidy. The jury speaks, and they are angry. Welcome. First question Martha asks is whether there was anything they would tell themselves if they could look back on the experience of getting that juror notice. What would they say to themselves now? Amy answers that she would have to find some excuse as to why she couldn't be on the jury. When Martha asks why, she says it was hard, it was long, and the chaos afterward was the worst part. Martha then asks, how has that chaos affected your life? Amy answers, I just kept my faith and believing that the truth would always come forth, and that she believes that they made the right decision. She kept faith that everything would turn out the way that it should. Gwen answers that she wouldn't change anything. She says she didn't enjoy it, but it was a privilege to serve, and she felt that she helped make a decision that was the right decision. Martha asks them if they knew Alex before. Gwen answers no, not at all, and in fact when she received her letter to report for jury duty, she had just set it aside. Amy says that she had read about it, knew of him, and that she didn't live far from him. At first, when she received the call to jury duty, she didn't realize what it was, but she saw the questions and the date, and later realized that it was the Alex Murdaugh case that she had been called for. Martha asks, what do they remember first about Becky Hill? To which Amy answers when she swore them in. Martha asks, what was your overall impression of her during this process? To which Amy says she was very accommodating. She made sure we had everything we needed. If there was an issue, she took care of it. If there were any questions, we asked the bailiff, and the bailiff would call her, and she would only come down if there was an issue that needed to be addressed. Anything they asked for, she made sure it was there, whether it was fruit or specific breakfast foods, it would be there. Martha, what do you remember hearing when she said Alex was going to testify? Amy says that all she remembers is Becky saying Alex was going to testify and that it may extend the trial a few days, and she remembers it because it flipped her out. She was exhausted and felt that she couldn't go any further. She adds that she didn't hear anything else about it. To which Martha asks, do you remember her ever discussing the Murdaugh family? Both answer no, with Gwen adding, that wasn't true, and then adds, well, I didn't hear it. The next question Martha asks is, did any other jurors say she was talking about what she thinks of the case or about Alex? To which they both answer no. Martha, what did you think about her publishing a book? Amy, I thought it was strange that a clerk of court was writing a book, but thought it must be okay since she did it. Martha, when you heard about the plagiarism, what did you think? Gwen, I couldn't believe it. I was shocked because of the type of person I thought she was. And then she talks about reading up from the news to see what Becky had done. When Martha asked if they read the book, Gwen says no, she only read the news about the plagiarism, and Amy says that she read pieces of it but not the whole thing, adding that it was written from Becky's experience so that it didn't speak to her experience as a juror at all. Referring to the evidentiary hearing, Martha asks about when they went back to court. What was it like to see Alex Murdaugh again? Amy says that she just wanted to make sure that he knew that her verdict was based on evidence and witness testimony, and that she tried to make sure that she looked at him when she answered the question, but also wanted to look at Justice Toll. But she looked at him because she wanted him to know that yes, her verdict was still the same. Gwen adds that she also looked at him. She didn't pay him a lot of attention. She directed to Justice Toll to make sure that they were understanding each other, but that she did watch it on court TV later, and she saw Alex to be just the same as she remembered. She mentioned some of his characteristics that she had observed in court earlier and at this hearing. Things like fiddling with his glasses, whispering, little things like that. But she specifically mentioned how his character seems to change very quickly and that he was just the same this time. Martha then asks about the turning point in their understanding of the case and whether or not Alex was guilty. Martha mentions how jurors before have said that the turning point in this was hearing Alex's voice on the recording at the kennel. So she asked them to tell her about that moment during the trial and what impact it had. Amy said when she heard it, she thought, oh my God, he was there, and he'd been saying he wasn't there. And then it just kind of progressed for her from there. She said the evidence was already coming together, and she felt that prosecution did a really good job explaining that it was family weapons, but the pivotal moment was when Alex's friends and colleagues stated their certainty that it was his voice. Gwen adds that she felt the same way. After listening to all the evidence, she felt that Alex thought that they would never get into the phone, but when they did and she heard his voice, she was like, okay, he did it. Martha then asks what they thought of his answer when he was asked about having lied about being at the kennel. Amy says the first thing he said when asked why did he lie was, oh, what a tangled web we weave. And she thought, that's the best you can do? You're on trial for your life. Moving on to Buster, Martha asks them what they think about Buster thinking that Alex is innocent. Amy says, of course, it's his father. That's what he believes. Repeating again, that's his father. He probably doesn't want to believe his father killed his mother and brother. But Gwen says she thinks Buster doesn't actually believe that Alex didn't do it. She thinks that deep down inside, he only has his father left, and he wants to hold on to him. Moving on to the news conference where Dick and Jim said that they were accusing Becky Hill of tampering with the jury, advising them not to believe Alex's testimony, and pressuring them to reach a quick, guilty verdict, what their reaction was. Gwen uses one word. She says, absurd. Amy says, insane. And then adds, I couldn't believe it. It's so insulting to think that we didn't have the God-given common sense that he gave us and intelligence to make a decision based on the evidence and witness testimony that we had given an oath to do, and that's what we did. That's what I did. Eric, who was also in this interview, adds that from the podium, Dick said that he was going to get their texts and their phone records, and this really felt like accusing them. And Dick also had said consult with counsel because they could have significant exposure if they misstep. And he says that that's how he came to represent 5 jurors, and he adds that to say they were so malleable that 1 or 2 comments allegedly made they would vote somebody to be guilty of killing their wife and son and do the rest of their life in prison is offensive. And they both add, very offensive. That's what I've been saying all along. It is offensive to think they didn't have enough sense to come up with this verdict on their own and were so easily swayed. Amy adds, I was livid, and that it's still amazing to her how people will believe a lie quicker than they will believe the truth, and that no one had any idea of what was going on during this trial, saying that when you sit on a jury, especially for 6 weeks, then you can maybe speak to what might have happened. But there was a lot of things going on personally in their lives, and they had to come in there every day, locked in a room, saying it was a weight on them and they had to make sure that it was right. She mentions people saying there were no notebooks, but they weren't allowed in the courtroom. That doesn't mean they didn't have notebooks. As soon as they went to the jury room, she said that they would write in their notebooks, which was allowed, and they would write things that they had questions on, and when it was answered, they would mark through it. So they were keeping notes. They were taking their job as jurors very seriously. And they are rightly offended that so many people have made the claim that they were tampered with, and that's how they came to their decision. Gwen adds, I consider myself an intelligent woman, and I'm able to make my own decisions. I'm not easily persuaded, and I'm not a follower, and I felt very offended by it. Some people in general were calling them country bumpkins because they're from a small town, but she said, hey, there are some smart country bumpkins in Walterboro. Martha asks whether it gave them confidence in the judicial system, and they both said they don't have a problem with the judicial system. They're more surprised by people that it got this far. I was surprised too. I know people love mess. I know a lot of people wanted the excitement of a new trial, but I think a lot of them never thought about just exactly what they were accusing this jury of by saying that their verdict was unfair or coerced or affected somehow by Becky Hill. Gwen adds, I thought we could render the verdict and that it would be over, and when all this came, I couldn't believe it. Amy says that when Dick said those things at the press conference, that her friends were texting her left and right saying, oh my God, and thinking that they had done something wrong. And she says, we didn't. We didn't do anything wrong. And this is something that Justice told them very clearly. None of you did anything wrong. And Amy adds, I love the way she handled everything. She was very good and very wise. Martha asks whether anyone ever indicated to them to watch Alex closely. They both say no, with Gwen adding that the jurors didn't really talk like people might have thought that they did. Amy says all we could talk about was our families, our children, our jobs, so we got to know each other really well and became friends, but didn't discuss the case at all. There will be something mentioned about that a little bit later too. Martha asks, what about when you went to Moselle? Because this is one of the accusations made based on things written in Becky's book. And she says Becky wrote about knowing glances between people when they looked at distances in the feed room and down at the kennel, that there was some kind of acknowledgement between people. Amy says she has no idea what she was talking about. That she stayed with the judge, that she followed him and his clerk, that they walked down to the house and back to the swamp, and she doesn't remember seeing Becky close to any of the jurors. Judge Newman had specifically said no talking, and that if they had any questions, they were to ask him. Gwen said that she has problems with her knees, so she was brought up in the van and they walked towards the house, but she stayed back, so she was never near Becky. Martha asked them what they drew from the visit to Moselle and whether or not it was a pivotal moment. Gwen simply says that it kind of added on to what they'd heard at the recording. I'm assuming, in other words, sealing their thoughts that he was in fact guilty. Martha asked if they felt pressured to reach a verdict quickly, because that's another claim that was made by the defense. They both answer no. Martha asks, not by Becky Hill? Again, they both say no, with Amy adding, she made it clear that Judge Newman said we had until 10 to make a verdict, but if we didn't, it was fine. She had found a hotel. We would have to be sequestered, which made sense. We were in deliberations. We didn't know we'd be in deliberations that day, but it made sense, and I'm sure she would have made arrangements for us to get whatever we needed. Personal items, whatever, but there was no pressure whatsoever, and then adds that the forelady had told them when we were in there alone and the door was locked that if they were too tired, that they didn't have to do this tonight, and that even after they came to their verdict, she said, if you don't feel comfortable with your decision, we don't have to go out there. We can stay here, or we can come back in the morning until you are all comfortable. Saying that she doesn't know how many times that she said that, and she doesn't understand how anyone felt pressured, because that's the claim the tenant of Egg Juror made, that she felt pressured. And others made a big deal about being told they were going to have to stay in a hotel. These are normal processes for deliberations on high-profile cases. This wasn't some kind of punishment. This wasn't some kind of means to make them hurry up and come to a verdict. This is just how things go. It's court procedure. Gwen adds, we kept going over the information, all the evidence. We kept going. We watched videos. We answered questions because there were a couple questions about the guns and that some of the guys were into crime shows or knew about guns and they were able to explain it, but she didn't feel any pressure at all. Adding that she was surprised that they weren't sequestered from the beginning, because it was a high-profile case. I've said that before, they were in fact fortunate that that didn't happen. She says they were lucky that they were able to go home and not be sequestered. Then she brings up the smoke break, and she says that throughout the trial, they got smoke breaks, But then when it was time to deliberate, it changed. She said this wasn't Becky's decision, but that once they started deliberations, they couldn't go out of the room, and that they knew that this was common sense because they were in deliberations. They were bringing evidence in and out. You can't go out. Martha asked, so that made sense to you? And they both say it made perfect sense. For further confirmation, she asks again, you couldn't go out until you're done deliberating for the day? Gwen says, right. It wasn't like she attacked the smokers. They got their breaks. A lot. And the deliberations were kind of last minute. During the trial, suddenly they were finished, and it was time to deliberate. So of course they understood you can't go out. And then there's another thing she wanted to say with Miss Becky, that Miss Becky didn't actually interact with them a lot. It was Mr. Bill, the bailiff, who was the one that they would interact with all the time. If they had a question, they had to go through Mr. Bill. If it was something for Miss Becky, he would take it to Miss Becky. Something that was brought up in the evidentiary hearing, Martha asked, did you ever hear that she and Bill drove a juror home? Gwen says that she was surprised to hear that. And the juror, we asked her, and she said no. Again, repeating that she was surprised by it, asking when did you get a ride with her because she was so surprised. And Amy said that was the first time she'd ever heard about it in the evidentiary hearing. Gwen adds that the juror did have car problems, but most times one of the jurors would take her or someone she knew would pick her up. But she was really surprised to hear that allegation made. Martha asked, what did you think when you heard Juror Z get up there during her exchange with Justice Toll? And asked, did you ever hear Miss Hill make any comment about the case before the verdict? Then she asked, did they read about that or hear it after? Amy says she watched it, but she cannot speak to her state of mind or what she felt she might have heard. She just knows that she didn't hear any of those things. And next she's going to explain what she thought of her during her testimony in the court. Now remember, she had the opportunity to spend 6 weeks with her during this trial. They ate together every day. She had a glimpse of her character. So she says that she felt that she seemed a little nervous, a little afraid, and that she seemed to take a long time to answer. So she can't really speak to why or what her state of mind was. She just knows what she heard. Martha asked Gwen, were you surprised knowing this juror from deliberation? Gwen says, I was kind of surprised because I sat by her every day, and even in the deliberations in the back there, she didn't express that she had a problem with it. She looked at the same evidence that they looked at, and she didn't express that she had a problem or say that she might have felt swayed to go another way because she could have voiced it back there, and she didn't. She also said they kind of had an idea who were the ones that might have had a little doubt about Alex's guilt, but that she wasn't one of them, and that she was surprised and felt that Juror Z had actually been persuaded by the defense. Noting that first she said there was juror pressure, and then she changed it, and that was very surprising to her. Martha says the other thing that was said when they said that they were going to try to overturn the case, that there was a misrepresentation of critical material information to the trial and the trial judge by Becky Hill, and that she had a campaign to remove a juror that she believed was favorable to the defense, that she wanted a guilty verdict, that she surmised that one of these jurors was leaning a little bit more towards a not guilty verdict. What was your understanding of this juror who was removed, and why? Gwen says, well, her and the other lady, they rode together every day. I'm assuming by the other lady she means Juror Z, who was Egg Lady's tenant, saying that she thought it was strange that they rode together. And this is the interesting part, because they were told and told and told not to discuss the case. Do you remember watching the trial? Every time the jury was dismissed, Judge Newman said not to discuss the case. Who didn't listen to that? Gwen goes on, the Egg Lady had to be reminded almost constantly about discussing things on the van in the morning or back in the back. She had to constantly be reminded that she cannot discuss the trial. Egg juror was rightfully removed from this jury. It had nothing to do with the Facebook post. It had to do with the fact that she ignored the instruction given by Judge Newman. Martha asked who it was that was reminding her not to talk. Gwen says it was the forelady on the van in the morning, or sometimes someone else just might say something to her about it. You know, just make a gesture or something to shush her. We can't talk about that, or whatever. Martha asked, was there any indication to you that she was leaning towards a not guilty verdict? Gwen says maybe a little bit when I think about it now, because she was so vocal and she was always one to talk and stuff. Martha asks Amy, what do you remember about the egg lady? And she says she wasn't in the room I was in, because remember, the jury was divided into 2 rooms. She says, so I didn't hear her, and we didn't end up on the same van all the time, so I wasn't really sure. Sometimes when I was in the same van, I did hear her say things, but I wasn't really sure what she was going to vote, but she was a little vocal and made you think maybe, but you weren't really sure what it would be. And then says that she herself was trying to focus on the evidence because it was a lot and that they had to stay focused on what was presented to them. Martha next asks about the motive. What did she think that the motive for the murder was, and whether or not they thought Alex had been planning it for some time, or was it an impulsive move made that night? Gwen said she has different thoughts of it. She thinks that maybe it was the pills, and she also thinks maybe Maggie expected certain things from Alex and that he wasn't going to be able to produce them in the end, so he had to get rid of them. And then Paul was going to have him bankrupt. So with the case coming up and all of that, he wasn't going to have any money either way it went. But she thinks the biggest part was the drugs. Amy says that there were a lot of things going on. He needed money. He needed to make sure that the Murdaugh name, that was very, very important to him more than anything else. And he needed to make sure that was always held in high regard. And now all these other things were coming about. The boat case, and Paul may be going to trial for it. And then all the things that he had done and whatever else may have been going on. And she thinks it was the perfect storm. So her opinion is exactly the motive presented by prosecution. Martha asks how many times they pulled themselves to get that guilty verdict in those 3 hours. Amy says twice. The first time, the foreperson just wanted to see where they were as a starting point, that they had no idea who voted what, it was all just written down on a piece of paper, and then the forelady went through and looked at the paper, and that she really wasn't going to tell them what the number was, but one of the jurors wanted to know, so she did tell them that the original one was 9 guilty, 2 not guilty, and 1 not sure. So from there, they went to asking questions. Nobody knew who voted what, nobody had a clue, they just went straight from there to asking questions. Then if someone had a question, other members of the jury would try to answer that question. And because the jury room wasn't big enough, they had to roll the evidence into the other room. And so the bailiffs would go get the evidence out of that room. And then there was a guy who worked the video. We would go back and watch certain clips. They looked at certain pictures, and so when all the questions were answered and nobody else had a question, then they voted again, and when they voted again, it was guilty. They both say it was unanimous. Amy said, but the foreperson still made it clear, if you're not sure, we will not leave this room. But everybody said, we're sure. Martha says, it sounds like you were a very organized jury. And Amy says, a great bunch of people. I loved each and every one of them, and repeats, a great bunch of people. Martha asks whether either of them are writing a book, and Amy says that she is, and she's writing about her experience of what you go through as a juror. Because so many people keep asking her questions, she feels like it's something that people want to know about. And that was the end. I wish it could have gone on longer and more questions had been asked and answered, but I was just happy that at least 2 of them got to speak for how they felt about these accusations. They also added that though their part is over, the case itself is far from over, as Dick and Jim have made it clear that they'll take it all the way to the Supreme Court if they have to. So I guess we're going to be meeting here for a long time. As always, this is Cassidy O'Connell saying stay well and stay tuned.